Hel- Yes, hello.
Yeah,
Nice, nice to
you're
be
going to
here.
talk to us about sequential Monte Carlo. So do you want to take the floor?
Okay. So can you hear me correctly?
Yeah, yeah, good.
There is some reverb in the room, so I'm
It's
sorry about
okay.
that. Okay,
It's
great.
okay.
So okay, and for the slides, is it okay?
Slides are good.
Okay, great. So I'm very happy for this invitation. And so what I'm going to present today is kind of overview about sequential Monte Carlo method or strategy for target distributions. And you can see that as a follow-up of the talk by Tony Lelièvre. And there are also, of course, relations with the talk of Pierre Delmoral and with the remarks that Nick Whiteley made before. Just to maybe to clarify something, first, I want just to say something, okay, just to be very clear, because Nick mentioned some works I did before about, yes, here, about large time behavior of interacting particle systems and how you can use this to compute eigenvalues and eigenfunctions, eigentriplets, and so on. So I'm not going to speak about that at all today, right? So there is a kind of confusion because you can use this literature, which is related to sequential Monte Carlo methods for the neutron branching process itself, okay? Where you see each neutron is a particle, and you split and you kill particles, and you look at the eigenvalue of the Feynman semi-group and things like this. So everything you've talked about during this conference. But in this talk, I will have a viewpoint where you use SMC in a different way, okay? Where in fact you see the neutron branching process as just a general stochastic model, okay? And on this general stochastic model, you can use splitting methods to simulate rare events or other kind of things. And this is exactly what Tony spoke about, okay? So in that case, the particle is not the neutron, the particle is a full branching process, okay? So I won't call this a particle, I call this a replica of the full system, okay?
So you mean it's a Markov process on the space of a evolving atomic model?
Yeah, I'm going to give you exactly how we construct a Markov modification of the full branching process after, right? So it's a bit confusing, but it's like this. It's funny because in this conference you can bring back SMC in two different ways, completely different way, which is quite unrelated. Okay, almost unrelated. Okay, so my talk here is not to present like some kind of fancy recent results we have on. Maybe I'll speak a little bit after central limit theorem and so on. It's more like an overview I give to colleagues and students because all these type of SMC methods you can use for rare events are presented in very different ways depending on the community. Okay, and I have a personal way to think about them in a kind of more general way, and it's very useful, I think, to be able to identify exactly what you're doing. So this is what I propose today. And all these methods is a kind of specific goal, okay, which is the same goal as MCMC, Markov-Chain Monte Carlo. So you have a target probability distribution, okay, and in fact, this target is given by a simulable distribution, okay. So this is going to be your random model, your stochastic model, your branching neutron model, okay. But you're interested to define a new target distribution, which is given by a density defined only up to normalizing constant. So this is the usual thing in Monte Carlo method. It's very basic. I'm sure you've done that. And this explains why it comes also a lot from Bayesian because you have a posterior distribution. Posterior distribution is just a distribution given up to normalizing constant, okay, given by the likelihood. And rare event is the same thing, except the conditioning now, the density is a conditioning by a rare event, okay? And in statistical mechanics, it's just the log likelihood, the log density is given by 1 over the temperature multiplied by some kind of energy, okay? So this is a Gibbs probability distribution. So in fact, all these problems are the same kind of problem, and I'm going to comment in my talk in which kind of situation you're interested in the methods I'm going to detail here. Okay, so I think that everyone here is familiar with that. And so the SMC perspective on that, so-called importance splitting, okay, which is a bit opposed to MCMC method, okay, but it's a bit artificial. And also it's opposed to importance sampling method. I'm also going to mention this. But this kind of opposition, it's a bit artificial in my opinion, because you can mix everything or you can have more general point of view. Okay, but not important. Well, what we do is we start with a sample of replicas of a stochastic model, and we run an algorithm, and the output is simply again a sample of n replicas. So you see here I have it's not particles, it's replicas. Approximately independent, and the distribution is a target distribution, of course. Okay, and an estimator of the normalization, right? Now I'm going to give you an overview of all the variants so that you'll be able to identify them, to understand what we call adaptivity in this context. And maybe I will speak a little bit on the application of neutron using the IMS algorithm, which is the talk of Tony was about. Okay. So to give you an idea, I'm going to give some notation for the rare event setting. So I have a reference probability that can be simulated, my full neutron branching process, okay, under some circumstances which are of interest. And the key idea here is I give a score function, okay. So sorry, it's not in RD, it's in S, okay. S was RD here, but okay. Okay, sorry. So the score function is defined on S, okay? And you assume that you start with the score positive, and the problem here is to define a small probability, which is the probability of the score is greater than S, and to simulate according to the target. And here the target is my initial probability, reference probability pi, conditioned to have a score greater than S, okay? So the main idea, the main concept of this is really, and you see in the talk it's going to be very important, is that in fact, by doing so, we define a smooth, continuous sequence of distribution. So it's a path, a continuous path in the space of probability distribution, and also with the addition of the normalization. Here it's a probability, the normalization, PS, okay? And when you have a high dimension problem, especially what you're going to happen, you really need to do it smoothly, otherwise you're going to be killed by the problem of high dimension, the problem of sampling. Okay, so it's very useful to have this smoothness with respect to the score parameter S. Okay, so just to give you an idea, you find this a lot in the sequential Monte Carlo lecture with a pioneering paper by Doucet Del Moral, which has a lot of amazing large number of citation, where you generalize that rare event problem to a general probability, target probability distribution, okay? And of course, in Bayesian, they like to use densities. So they introduce a potential, okay, which is VS. And so you just know the potential VS, but you don't know how to compute the normalization associated with this potential, okay? So you know how to compute V, but not the normalization. You can have the gradient. And so now you have a normalization, and the target distribution is simply a Gibbs distribution associated with this potential, okay? So it's the same kind of problem. And if you have V, which is 0 or plus infinity, you have you recover the rare event case, okay? So maybe just, this is just a fancy generalization to manifold. So just a remark, maybe I don't want to I have nothing to do with today's talk, but you can also see the same thing with reference probability, which is the reference probabilities, a flow of reference probabilities, which are completely not absolutely continuous with each other, okay, and they can be defined on different, I would say, congruence of manifolds, okay, and the only important point is that you are able to push a reference probability on one manifold to another manifold, okay, In fact, you can do that on symplectic, on cotangent space using the fact that you can construct numerically construct symplectic maps. Okay, so it's just a remark. If you're interested, you can look at. It's called Manifold Monte Carlo, and we did some stuff with Lelièvre and Stolzenfeld. Okay, so I skip that. So I go back to the general picture, and of course, all these problems are very similar when you're in a high-dimensional or low temperature or even application. And basically, the idea is that you cannot do basic importance sampling in this kind of setting, right? So, of course, you would say, I'm going to do a kind of Girsanov formula or kind of change of probability so that I can target my rare event, for instance, or my node distribution. But there are many situations where doing so is not very robust, especially in this type of context. And so I mentioned here an interesting paper, recent paper by Chatterjee Diaconis, where they really explain that you can quantify the difficulty to do importance sampling, to quantify the cost of importance sampling by looking at the relative entropy between the target distribution and your educated proposal distribution. So you see that in high dimension, it's extremely difficult to find, even if you're very educated, to find an educated proposal to have a reasonable relative entropy when computed on the target distribution. Okay, this is where this type of SMC method enters in the game. Okay. Okay, so here you see, I already mentioned this, so I can go fast. You have this type of problem with low temperature, target distribution, high dimension, and rare event. Okay. So now I'm back to your application of interest, branching neutron. So we did a little bit of work with Dumontet and his student Henri Louvain, where we applied AMS, which is a type of SMC methods in a way. I'm going to explain this. And in fact, it was really more used in a kind of short-term perspective, where you have a source here, and then you have your branching neutrons here. And we look at the law of the neutron branching process, and basically it was not like on very, very large time, right? So if you do that, but in fact, I want to mention that you can do also things like that. If you have, say, modified, or if you change the probability distribution of your branching process, or you modify you control the population to do some type of large time simulation. And what you can do is just look at the stationary distribution, and you take a time window, and on this time window, you can try to simulate rare events. Okay, so this would be like large deviations of your Monte Carlo simulation, modifying by importance sampling or whatever you want. Doesn't matter, we don't care here. You just say, okay, I have my pi. My pi is whatever you want, okay? And how do I do in order to smoothly simulate conditionally on a rare event, okay? So for instance, what you can do here, basic idea, okay? You just define some space function psi, okay, and you're going to look at the level set psi equal constant. Once you've done this, okay, you are inside the rare event formalism. Why? Because you can define a score function on your full system, which is the maximum over time of some function. Okay. So here, if you have a branching process, it's indexed by time, which is, I think, physical time, more or less, depends. But zeta of xt is max, so you have a maximum of some function of your process. Here it's a Markov process. So here, what you can consider, I think it's interesting, is you look at the total energy of neutrons at time t, okay, and you look at a level in a region, okay, where which it is the first region where you have at least a given critical energy threshold E0 of neutron. Okay, I'm going to give you a picture after maybe, and then when you have a score function, you're back to your general framework where you have normalization and conditional probability distribution, target distribution. Okay. So here you see I computed the score of my branching process here, which is just here you see I have a, maybe I should put with my here I have an absorption event. Okay, so after this psi, for psi greater than this score here. Okay, I only have 1 or 2 neutrons, and I don't have enough energy to trigger the score. Okay, so but just before you have enough energy to trigger the score. So, yeah, or I have too much energy here, so this is a good score. Because say you want to okay, of course, here what I have in mind is I want to sample rare events where I have a lot of energy near the boundary of your power plot, for example. It's a stupid example I just cooked up without thinking about it. Okay. Now what you can do to construct a next rare event simulation, you will need to modify your one realization of your branching neutron. So here we are in this kind of case. What you can do is use the Markov property, the strong Markov property. So you define the first heating time of your of the function which define your score here, which is tau s. Okay, here tau s. And then you remark that tau s equal plus infinity. So the fact that you really reach this is exactly the same as having a score smaller than s. Okay, so if your score is smaller than s, it exactly means that in fact you never reach this level, this score s, and so your heating time is just plus infinity. Okay, and now using the strong Markov property, what you can do is simply simulate again your neutron branching process after this heating time tau s. Okay, very simple. So this is a very special structure here on this kind of dynamical problems, and I'm going to explain you why it is important after, because you have a big theory on this type of Markov, sequential Monte Carlo. And what you do by doing so you have a simple way to construct a modification, after this time tau s, modification of your full system, okay, but which exactly leaves invariant the target distribution, eta s. Okay, so eta s is pi conditioned by score greater than s, right? And so what you do by doing all this business here is you just construct a Markov kernel on the full system, okay, which modifies this system in a way so that if it's initially distributed according to the target, it's again distributed against the target. So here you see, maybe you imagine, you think where I'm going. You can use this like in a MCMC setting. So you can use this MS to modify your stochastic model, okay, without changing the target distribution, okay. So this is exactly what you do in very general. Okay, so maybe just a picture here. So it's a very dirty picture. Sorry, I've done this yesterday 2 days ago for the conf. So here what you do, so psi equal s is a given score, okay. So here you see my branching process. I've managed to reach this score. So I look at the state psi of tau s, x of tau s. I look at x of tau s, which is the state of the system at the heating time tau s. So this is these 3 horrible dots here. Okay, so what I do, I copy the system before, and after I just sample new particles. Okay, so this one is going out. This new one is absorbed instead of giving 2 neutrons, and this one is going out. Okay, so I'm able to generate diversity. Okay, but of course only in the region where I am interested to look at what's going on. Right. Okay, so now I can explain what is a very general concept to construct sequential Monte Carlo. So the basic idea here is that it's methods which doesn't change, of course, you don't change the probability. You don't do important sampling. You don't modify the physics, or you don't modify the way you simulate pi. Okay. What you do is you're going to select, replicas which have a great score, basically. So very simple. So you've seen AMS, so I'm not going to repeat. And the general formalism is this one, and you see it's different from AMS. I'm going to explain why it's the same thing. So you give yourself a finite ladder of scores. Okay. You assume you've given this. Okay, and you note the state of your replica n at iteration I. Okay, xn is I. Okay, So the first thing to do is, of course, to simulate initially independent replicas, blah, blah, okay. And the only compulsory thing is to give weights. So here it's importance weights, okay. So what you do is simply you say, okay, I'm going to increase one step in my ladder of scores. I have a new score SI, okay. So I have a new target, and because I have a different target, I compensate the difference between my old target and new target by giving weights to replicas, probability weights, okay. So it's not really probability weights here because I take into account the fact that I want to compute a normalization here. So those weights are not normalized. Okay, it's just to understand the thing here. Okay, and when I do this, I can do selection. So if my weights now relative weights between the replicas are bad, I can say, okay, I'm going to select some replica and remove some replicas. You can do this more or less as ever you want, and it's quite an optional thing, in fact. And the third step is the mutation. And here again, in this setting, it's a kind of optional thing to do. Okay, what you say is going, okay, now I can pick some replicas, and I say on this replica I want to generate some diversity. Okay, I want to modify them. So as soon as you have this kernel MS here that I talked about, I constructed it for the neutron branching process. As soon as this kernel, modification kernel, mutation kernel, leaves invariant the target distribution, the new target distribution, okay, then it's not a problem because I know that my replica system is targeting this distribution, so I can freely change the states using this. I'm not going to change the target distribution. Okay. Okay, right. So now we've done that. You can construct estimators with this. And of course, the first estimator is the estimator of the target distribution. It's given simply by the normalized weighted empirical distribution of the replicas, right? Easy. And of course, now the normalization, so like the relevant probability and this kind of thing, is given by the average weights of the replicas. Okay. So you see here, I keep in the weight also the information relative to the normalization. So for instance, in the IMS algorithm that you've seen yesterday, what I do is that each time I'm going to kill a particle, okay, so when I do my resampling process, I need to keep the information that I keep a particle, and I store the information inside the weight here. Okay. So maybe I'm going to give more details on this. Okay. So here it's like this. So how do I do that? I do that in the selection scheme. So I draw branching numbers. So what do a select what happens when you select replica? When you select replicas, you select branching numbers which are associated with each replica. You can do that moreover as you want. Okay, you do that. It's not a problem. The key point is that what you want is that when you give new weights to your replica, so it can be, for instance, it might be equal to 0 so that you kill, or you can be greater than 1 and you're going to split your replicas. Then the conditional expectation of your new weight multiplied by the branching is equal to the preceding weight. Okay. So this is just a natural consistency you get so that the non-normalized empirical distribution are not modified or are not biased, if you want. Okay. So of course you don't do in practice. You don't do that stupidly. You try to choose your branching number so that you're going to divide the weights which are big, and you might kill replicas which has a very small relative weight. Okay, and so you do that to minimize the effective sample size. You can define effective sample size basically with a chi-square or relative entropy, or any entropy anyway. Okay. Donc, ça, so you know. So this is a general. So I'm going to explain consistency after, but the most basic reference is sequential Monte Carlo samplers here. You have some recent papers, for instance, when they do some adaptative stuff on this. I get this paper also, which is quite interesting, and then you got the paper on AMS. Okay. So interestingly, this method exists in physics in completely different settings called Jargin's quality. Okay. But I don't have time to comment on this. And Freddy Boucher have used this method recently to do, I think, to generate rare events like heat waves on climate models and very big complex models. So it could be interesting. Some books here. So okay. So now in this context, what is adaptivity, right? So so you've seen AMS yesterday. So the idea of AMS was quite different because you don't have a predefined ladder of scores. Okay. But what so here, non-adaptive case, I've got a preset ladder of score and preset choice of mutation. Okay. So like in AMS, I said you have, it's called an adaptive variance, adaptive multi-level splitting. And it's presented as to say, okay, the choice of the score is random. Okay. So here I propose a kind of different mind step, which is to say, okay, in fact, it's not really what's going on in this type of methods. The idea is that the scores are always deterministic. In fact, what you really want to think about is a continuous ladder of scores, because you have very difficult target distribution. You want really to think about it like a continuous ladder of score. And the idea is that you're going to interpret adaptivity like you're going to mutate only if there is selection. And in a way, it's a smart thing to do, because what you do mutation for certain kind of reasons, and basically two reasons. First, you want to increase, to decorrelate between replicas. And this correlation only happens when you do a splitting event between replicas, okay? And the second reason is that, in fact, selection usually are triggered by the effective sample size, that is the degeneracy of weights. And the degeneracy of weights basically tells you how fast your target distribution becomes singular with each other, how the relative entropy between two target distribution is going to increase. And you really want to use computational power only if this difficulty of the target distribution increases very fast. Okay. So this is the reason why we do that. And so here what I'm going to explain, and this is really the main message of this talk, is that you can do that in different ways, but basically if in a way you have a preset choice of mutations, okay. So if your mutations are really completely preset by the value of the score, then you have a Feynman-Kalk structure, what I call a Feynman-Kalk-Delmoral structure, where you have unbiasedness and you have a lot of theory on this type of algorithm. But you don't always have this case, and in this case, you really have a true adaptivity, and you lose the unbiasedness property. I'm going to explain that. So when I say unbiasedness, I mean unbiasedness of the non-normalized estimators. So the estimator of the small probability of the rare event, but any estimator that can be written in expectation of something of the initial model. Okay. So when you condition, you try to estimate ratios of expectation of something from the basic models. Okay. But there are quantities what are called unnormalized, what are just expectation of something. And in that case, if you have this type of structure where your choice of mutation here, in fact, is preset, then proposition, you'll have unbiasedness. And the reason is that because you have a Feynman-Kalk structure, so you can construct martingales, and because you have martingales, you have unbiasedness. Okay. So I'm going to explain this. So as I said, the preset mutation, so it means that each replica are applied a certain mutation, which is triggered by the value of the score, and only the value of the score. So it is really the value of the score which triggers the modification. Okay, and we'll see this is the case for AMS. And a lot of methods also, and this is other type of AMS, which I call static AMS in the literature. So it's a bit confusing here, because those two are presented as the same, but they have a different structure. Okay. And what I call mutation is selection, and this is when you say, okay, I don't want to mutate all the time. I only wait until I have a selection, and then I trigger my mutation kernel. Okay. And then a specific case is here also, which is used in AMS, where if you imagine that you have a splitting event, okay, and you split children such that the sample of children also correspond to the target. So for instance, you can do you can kill some replica, okay, in order to have a certain kind okay, you first kill some replica. You have a weighted empirical distribution which is targeting a given target distribution, and then you create new offspring according to this weighted empirical distribution. So of course, the offspring are going to be approximately distributed according to this target distribution, and then you can say, okay, because of this, why not? I can mutate only the children because okay, this is I only want to mutate when I copy my system and when I copy my system, and so I only apply the mutation kernel at this point. Okay. So maybe I can go faster here. So what you can do in practice, you compute an effective sample size, okay? And when you have the threshold, you trigger selection, and if selection happens, okay, you trigger mutation on all replicas. And the mutation on child, you do the same thing, okay? So you kill in the selection, you first kill some replicas, and then you generate the offspring according to the approximation of the target distribution. And once you do that, you apply the mutation only to the children. Okay. So this mutation on child is what is called a static AMS for the case of rare event. Okay, but it's also used in other contexts. So remarks, as I said before, the point of using trigger mutation is to save computational power. Okay, so the main idea is that maybe you could do that by mutating everyone a little bit, but the problem is that you don't really know when to do that. Okay, so the advantage of doing trigger mutation on children, especially, is that you know that in that case you've computed the weight degeneracy. Okay, you have you know that in that case you in order to follow your target distribution, you need to split your replicas, and because of this, you know that it is at that time that you need to mutate. Now the question is how much because you can mutate more or less. Okay, you can mix more or less, and this is quite an open question to really optimize that. So now, when you do that, of course, the question is, why does this work? Okay, so maybe I don't have time to go all of this, and it's not very necessarily consistently written in the literature, but the important point you have to keep in mind, you have two different kinds of consistency. The first one is a large sample. What you want is, basically, when you do that, when you take n goes to infinity, you must have a weak law of large number. You want everything to converge to the target distribution. Okay, in principle, it's not very difficult to obtain, but you have to think a little bit about that, depending on the variant. But there's a second kind of consistency, which is quite interesting, and this is a large mixing consistency. And this is when you, in fact, assume that your mutation kernel, okay, is ergodic, okay, it's mixing, and you apply it a lot of time. So it's not our case. It's not the case I presented with the branching neutron process. Is different because you cannot mix because you are constrained by the state where you apply the strong Markov property, X to S, okay? So this prevents mixing, okay? But in other cases, it's also an interesting thing to look at, okay? And so, of course, in fact, what I claim is that all what I presented is really related to the adaptive multi-level splitting. I'm going to explain this to end my talk. And oh yes, a very interesting aspect is that the AMS in the dynamical selecting, in fact, the hidden non-adaptive Feynman-Delmoral structures. I'm going to explain what it is, but remember that this non-adaptive case, okay, is equivalent in my jargon to preset mutations. Okay, so you can add adaptivity to mutation. For instance, typically people also use some kind of they compute things in the past to adjust and accept reject rate when they do. Typically, they are going to use a metropolis or kind of MCMC kernel to do the mutation. They are going to adapt the proposal to be able to adjust the accept reject rate. Okay. So now the Feynman-Cake-Delmoral structure. So it's very simple. I think in this conference, everybody knows that. So in fact, when you have preset mutation, the basic idea is that you can rewrite everything using Feynman-Cake formula. Okay, so when you understand that, you understand why everything is going to be consistent, even if it's not adaptive, because everything is going to be triggered by the empirical distribution of particles, all right? So you will get some kind of mean field consistency in the limits when you have a large sample, okay? And you can really use this Feynman-Cake structure to justify your method. Okay. So so the idea is that here, in fact, you can rewrite your. It's not completely trivial. In fact, if you say, well, but speaking about weighted, but it's quite bizarre to apply a mutation kernel which is invariant to target distribution to a probability. Empirical set of replicants which is weighted. The fact you have a weight and the fact you use a mutation is a bit strange, but this can be understood using this because in fact your target distribution, so here pi is my distribution, exponential minus vs is my target distribution, non-normalized one, you can write an equality using a Feynman-Cake formula. So it's kind of strange thing, but it's really extremely simple. It's trivial here. It's just that you have the weighting here, okay, and which is a difference between the new potential of the new target and the old of the preceding target distribution. And X is simply a Markov chain which is generated with a probability transition, but with a S which is evolving. So here you see the importance to having a preset mutation because it's just like, okay, I'm going to increase the score, okay, and each time I increase the score, I mutate with a new mutation kernel, okay? And you can compute this. In fact, it's the first step to understand this type of method. If you understand this formula, you're going to convince yourself that the method's general framework I spoke about makes sense, okay? And of course, to do that, after you can use all the SMC Delmoral particle models you want, okay? By simulating Markov chains, you give weights to the Markov chain, which is exactly the weights we have in the method here, okay? And then you can do selection if you want. You may not do selection if you don't want, or if your weights are okay, it doesn't matter. And of course, because you have this structure, so in physics it's called Jarzynski inequality. I don't speak it. It's again a community which is using exactly the same stuff as our community with a completely different notation, completely different jargon. But in the end, they have the same problem when it comes to Monte Carlo methodology. But anyway, and so because of that, you have a normalized estimator which are unbiased. And the reason is that because of the Feynman-Cake structure, you can consider the Feynman-Cake semigroup here, and you apply the backward error analysis. So this is a Delmoral kind of thing where you plug into the semigroup from A to A0 to the final score the estimator, unnormalized estimator at level SI. Okay, and if you do that, you compute this like a backward error analysis, and you see this is a martingale. This is basically just Markov property, and so just that's all. Okay, so because you have martingale, you know you don't have a bias, and also you see you're going to be able to do fluctuation analysis. Okay, because you can compute the quadratic variation of the martingale. You can do it at the limit of the quadratic variation when the sample size goes to 0 and obtain central limit theorem. So we did that for some more degenerate case with hard obstacles some time ago, but we were quite happy. So just maybe I need to stop in 5 minutes. So I want to now to explain my point of view here on this method. And the idea that you really need to think about this method, as I said, for a continuum of scores. And the reason is that typically in high dimension, so you can do a little back on the envelope calculation here. When you say, okay, I have a very great dimension, and my x have IID coordinates, and v has some kind of sum structure, and I look at the weights, and you know that important sampling is going to be very bad at high dimension, and you will have to adjust the difference between the two target distribution according to by the CLT 1 over square root of dimension size. Okay? So you will need to have very small increasing of score if you have a very big dimension. So it's tempting, of course, not to mutate at every S, to dilute your computation. So because I forgot to mention this, but all the computational cost is in the mutation. Okay, mutation is where you change your model, but everything else, weighting and selection, you just start from a already existing simulation. It costs zero, basically, of course. So you switch to a continuum score. Now you can construct the same algorithm, okay, but in a time continuous fashion. But of course, time now is not time; it's the value of the score, right? So we had a sequential Monte Carlo where the sequence is indexed by different scores. Now we have a kind of time continuous sequential Monte Carlo, but now the time is not the physical time, of course; it's a different value of the score. Okay. So in that, you can do preset mutations the same way. You just have to construct, for instance, Markov jump process. You can simulate explicitly with leaves invariant the target distribution for each S. Exactly the same as before. And what you do is you're going to now, in your computational, when you do the code, you're going to code it by iterating on the selection event. Right? What you can do is you compute the weights, like the same thing, you compute the weights for all the scores in a continuous fashion. Okay. Typically, you can put the derivative and the integral. You can do this because if you jump kind of mutation, you can just integrate on between each jump. It's okay. You compute the selection again using effective sample size on your weights. Okay. And the key point here is that you distinguish between your trigger mutation which if selection happens, and you preset mutations here. And when you do your preset mutation, what you do in fact, okay, you're just going to compute it for all scores by anticipation. You can anticipate what's going to happen after. So of course, you lose a little bit of computation power because you can have some particles that are going to be replicas, which are going to be removed, and then you still have computed all the preset mutations, okay? But for IMS, it's okay. So this is IMS. Okay. It's just a kind of slightly generalized version of IMS, okay? But this is IMS, okay? And simply in IMS, you see you got the triggered mutation and preset mutation. So as I told you, there are two versions of IMS. The static IMS, in fact, you don't have the preset mutation. You just have the trigger mutation. And after selection, I mutate as I can. But in the dynamical IMS, okay, what you have is you only have preset mutation. And the reason is because of this special structure, a special mutation when you use a strong matter property to generate it. So just to, okay, so I skip this because I need to stop. So the static IMS, in fact, as I told you, the mutation are real adaptive mutations. They only happen when you have a selection. But in fact, in the dynamic IMS, you have this hidden structure of preset mutation, which implies the Feynman-Kalk-Delmorel structure, which implies all the analysis you want, which is kind of nice, but not not a miracle. Maybe I can comment on this. In fact, because yes, so sorry. So I need to stop. So it's because, in fact, you can look at what do you do. So you remember it was the beginning of the talk. I said, okay, I have a full model, stochastic, but this model has a strong Markov structure. Okay, so to do a mutation, what I do is I define my Raven with a score, and I look at the first hitting time of the score, and then to generate diversity, I resample my underlying Markov process from this stopping time here. So basically, if you just look at the value of the score, what you simulate when you do that is simply a Markov transition, but indexed by the score. Okay, so it's just that you look at the heating time of your xi equal s. It was zeta, sorry, it was zeta for the, and then you look at another score with a small score here, and you generate again the heating time of this guy. So if it doesn't reach that, okay, so it means you doesn't hit the score and you're killed. So basically, in fact, if you look at it with a new time, which is the score level, what you got is a Fleming view process, and the Fleming view process has this Feynman-Cake. Is just with a killing, just a killing, in fact, and this Feynman-Cake-Delmoral structure, and you can all of you want. Okay, so you can just the image. I think Tony shows you that here. So when you see when you resample here, what you do is in fact for each S, you see what you're going to happen. For each S, your mutation is preset because your mutation is just the probability transition to go from this to the first hitting place of this score here. And here again, until you reach the maximum score, and then up your replica is killed. Okay? So you see the mutation, you cannot fool around with the mutation. They are basically implied by the structure of the score function. Okay. And so because we do this, we managed to do some fluctuation analysis, and especially central limit theorem, which was previously obtained with, by Delmoral and Miklo, but we obtained this on a kind of hard obstacle situation, and you can compute variance. So maybe I just want to comment now as a conclusion on different matters. So here's the variance. You have an asymptotic variance, but okay, variance for R events is a problem. Central limit theorem for R event is a big problem because you have apparent bias, as Tony mentioned. This is because it's very asymptotic. It's very asymptotic. So when people say, okay, the minimum variance is obtained for what's called the commuter, that is, in fact, you have this very, very nice formula. So with colleagues, Frédéric Serroux, especially Frédéric Serroux and Arnaud Guinader, we're working a lot on this formula. We're doing a lot on this, but we're not completely, at least I'm not completely satisfied with this. Because variance, I prefer relative entropy, is much more convincing, but this is another debate. But at least here you are able to characterize the case when your reaction coordinate, your score function, the score function, has a minimum variance. And this is in fact when the probability of the rare event starting from a different initial condition here is constant on the target distribution here. And in fact, if you take a diffusion from the dynamical setting, you see that you resample once you hit a given score function, and if you're on the commuter, it means that on this level set, okay, the variance is going to be 0, and this term is going to be 0. Okay, so here you have the minimal possible variance. It's logarithmic in P. So the relative variance is logarithmic in P, which is very nice. Of course, in fact, in practice, maybe I can conclude on this. Of course, in practice, it's not very satisfactory because, as I said, variance is not really reasonable. And you got this paper by Chatterjee and Giaconis, and if you're interested, I really recommend to read it. It's very interesting, and they really explain very well at some points things we have already observed, that in practice, either you're okay with the method, and this works fine, and it doesn't work fine. It's not the variance is bad. It's a bad. It's a bad estimation, but it's that you're really not in a regime of central limit theorem, and you still have a very heavy tail distribution for your numerical simulation, your Monte Carlo simulation, and you're going to have a simply apparent bias because the statistical error are encoded in something which is itself a rare event of the Monte Carlo simulation. That is, sometimes it's going to really do a good simulation and estimate a probability which is in fact quite large. But in fact, most of this is a rare event. You never see that, and most of the time you're going to compute very, very small probability. So you're going to underestimate. Yeah. And this is very complicated because you have a chicken and egg problem, which comes from the fact that this type of problem comes from the fact that you have bad sampling. Because this is itself a rare event for the Monte Carlo simulation method. And giving a theory on that, a theoretical framework, is a kind of open problem. Okay, so we're more or less working on this, but I want to just to mention this because it's I know you're interested in, of course, uncertainty quantification, and for Monte Carlo it's a big problem. But you see, the problems you have, it's better than important sampling when important sampling phase because it's more robust here. But it's still unclear how you theoretically understand in which case you're good and in which case you're bad. And when you're bad, it's because you're sampling with an interesting key event with very small probabilities. This can be understood using large deviations, but I don't have time to speak how large deviations can explain how to think about that. Okay, I stop. Sorry to be late.
Thanks, Pierre.
Matthias.
So Matthias, sorry, yes,
okay.
Too many Pierres here. I have a question actually. Before I'm going to do the usual thing and start the questions. So there's something. So I'm also new to this area. Actually, I'm just wondering if I could share my screen in order to ask the question. Let's see if I can do this. So here comes my iPad, and so let's get the new thing here. So just going back to so here is your React, sorry, not your React, your domain of concern. Here is your source, and I've understood that you are building what I would call, I mean, this is very pleasant for me to see this, essentially stopping lines is how they were called. So these were kind of the idea of in branching process, Jacques Neveu, Chauvin. I think you can define, also Dinkin called them exit measures. So you can stop your branching process according to certain criteria. You are using this kind of height function to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I understand that, so this is your Markov process is everything in green that you see here, and then you're continuing from there and doing more things, perhaps with a different level set. And at the same time, you're doing sequential Monte Carlo tricks on this. Okay, now here's my question. So let's suppose, let me get rid of everything I've just done and go back to the beginning here. So let's suppose I'm interested in here is a window, okay? So I'm interested in what from this source here comes out of the window. So I don't want to simulate all these particles that kind of go off here, right? That's just a waste of time. Now, because it's essentially it's a branching process that's going on here, and because this is in effect a symmetry state, this boundary is a symmetry state. If I were to just run this branching process to its natural conclusion, so some of them would enter, some of these genealogies would enter the window, some of them wouldn't. I think I'm not wrong in saying if I just follow the genealogies that enter the window, right? So I color the genealogies that enter the window. Then I've kind of done a thinning of the branching tree. So I've thinned it down, and my thinning is essentially something to do with the symmetry being this window, right? So the end of the tree, which is usually infinity, so usually you run your tree forever, if it's a supercritical thing, but this doesn't matter, the situation. I mean, this is just the boundary of the tree is where it hits these, the boundary of the containment domain. So this green tree, it's another branching process. And I think one can write down specifically its branching rates. I mean, the branching rates will be spatially dependent. They will depend on where a particle is. So obviously a particle here, if it's going to be in this green tree, will have a much stronger need to go towards the window than say a particle here, which may have a little more freedom. But on the whole, the green tree, the statistics of the green will have will be particles that have this very strong bias to move towards this this window. Let's call it W. This window. Okay. Now I'm wondering if I apply the method that you are suggesting, that when we start looking at these kind of stopping lines that are judiciously chosen, I'm wondering if the kind of the effect of the sequential Monte Carlo, the effect of kind of weight biasing, could be the same as effectively trying to simulate this green tree, right? So you don't want to be simulating the stuff over here, obviously, and your algorithm, I think, should accommodate for that. Is it effectively the same thing? Is it more or less, if can one set it up as doing the same thing?
The problem, I don't think so, because well, I don't know. At least for the type of score functions that I've described, okay, you need to keep memory of all the particles, because you want to be able to simulate some very unlikely trajectories, which would go, for instance, for one particle would go in the wrong direction, but by very likely being very lucky, it managed to find a new path which was unexpected, which goes to your window W here.
Sure.
So I'm not sure exactly. Well, something like that. So if,
but that's fine, because that would still be in my green tree.
Yeah, but it could be not in your green. It could come from not your. Could be from one of the red paths here. So.
Well, my definition of the green tree is precisely those paths which end, whose leaves are in the window. So every such path, even the crazy ones.
Yeah. So maybe what? Okay. So I have to okay. But in that case, I think you need to revisit the way you use the Markov property, because here you have something which you.
So another way of asking my question, or is to turn it around as a suggestion. And I think if one works out this, you can work out of the green tree. Unfortunately, you know, the bias, let's say the changes in the rate functions that you will get, I mean, they'll be written in terms of certain probabilities, and if you knew those probabilities, you wouldn't be doing this in the first place, right? It's the usual story. The H bias, the Doob H transform you really want in the end is probably the function you know, the eigenfunction you're trying to estimate in the first place. So you know, if you knew that, you wouldn't do it in the first place. But and essentially it's the what is the bias? So the bias will be, it will be a branching process with the the original characteristics, Doob-H transformed in the appropriate way, such that at any spatial point, you're weighting by the probability that you're guaranteed to have an ancestor who dies in this window. Sorry, a future. Progeny is the word, right? Ahead of you to die in this window. But you can kind of coarsely replace that precise phase transform by, you know, one of these sampling tricks somehow.
Right? So it reminds me of what people do, and they call this I think Markov chain SMC. I don't remember. Basically, what they do is that they look at the genealogical tree of so the question is, are you able to reconstruct the red trajectories, okay, only from your green ancestral lines, okay, in a way such that you are creating, so again, a Markov chain on the full system, which is leaving a variant, some kind of target distribution. I think, yeah, probably you can do that, yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you answer I don't know exactly, because I'm not exactly familiar with
just
that.
Just to kind of fine tune a little bit. I mean, there is this story of branching Brownian motion in an interval, and you run your Brownian motion, your branching Brownian motion. Some of them will exit, some of them will continue, and you can do the same. You find the genealogies which survive forever. Right, so this is space, and this is time.
Yeah, sure.
So you make the genealogy, and the green tree that you trace out is another branching process, and it's a branching process where, you know, if previously you were branching at rate beta, even spatially dependent, now you're branching at rate. I do this off the top of my head, by the way. By something like P of X, and P of X is the probability that the particle starting at X will produce an infinite tree, right? So it's the same concept here. Instead of staying in an interval, instead of asking of an infinite genealogy, or a genealogy to a leaf that remains in this interval, you're asking a genealogy which has at its leaf a property, and that property is to be in this window. So you will get a similar kind of biasing, but of course, this is exactly you know, these are things you want to know, these probabilities. You don't know them explicitly. Anyway, maybe we could talk offline about this, because my gut instinct is that by combining, so this is a recent kind of technology for branching processes. And my instinct is that by combining this with the sequential Monte Carlo, you may get something different. I mean, in the end, it may end up being exactly the same as what you're doing anyway. I kind of suspect it will just end up bringing us back to what you're doing anyway. But there's something to be discussed there, I have a feeling.
Yeah, but okay. Yeah, sure. Sure, but just to be sure, yeah. So of course your goal here is to be able to not to simulate again all the system.
No, specifically the ones in the window, because this is a, you know, here I'm standing here. I mean, this is a genuine question, right? I'm standing here looking in. I know there's a source here. Am I exposed, right? This is for example, could be a medical question. You know, well, what's my exposure? Well, I don't want to simulate all this stuff coming over here. I'm just wasting my time simulating stuff.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway, okay.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
So can I quickly, I'm not sure this isn't to some degree what Andreas was just asking, but so you, am I right that you don't, or you sort of don't think you're trying to use the important sampling type methods?
Yeah. So
or
I think so something we've never did, but we so basically so it depends, but typically you can completely mix this method with importance sampling. Okay, but the idea I think optimally would be to if you use a full importance sampling,
Mhm.
what it means you're not satisfied with the result because you have weights which becomes you have a lot of fluctuation in the weights because of course you're not able to guess the good distribution. So what you can do is just to tune down a little bit the importance sampling. Still, you're going to do a little bit of this, but in a way so that in the end, when you reach your event or whatever you want, you have a manageable weights. And then on the top of this, you can use this method. You see? It doesn't matter. You just see that your model with importance sampling, which is more tuned as you want, you just see as a new stochastic model, and you apply this on the top of this in a completely abstract way. You apply this method, and you just have to add the weights in the end. That's all.
Okay, yeah, right. So, but it's
So
yeah. I mean, but when you do then so the other flip side is as you go from S to S plus DS in your
yeah.
how much? I mean, I guess if you do importance sampling, you are somehow trying to increase the probability of having a successful one in the next generation.
For sure.
So you simulate fewer failed attempts, I would guess. But actually, once you get to S plus DS, you should see the same profile. Does that sound right?
So in the end, you
modulo some weight adjustment, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but for instance, in the end, you're estimating the same quantity. So
yeah. So I mean, you should get the same thing.
But I agree that it's a very good idea too. Usually what people say is that this method, and you can see it on the variance by a little calculation. It's more robust than the importance sampling because you don't have the problem to have a completely crazy degeneracy of weights. You cannot be worse than the naive Monte Carlo methods. So it's more robust. You have a lot of arguments which adds up, tells you the method is more robust. But still, if you have a good intuition, a priori, educated knowledge on how things are going to happen, it's a good idea to use importance sampling, of course. So I think Pierre Dalmoral and Jocelyn Garnier, they did some simulation, some paper where they mix a little bit the two on a simple case, but basically it's not something which is very much studied. But I think this is a good way to go, personally.
Okay, I mean, I think one of the pictures I had in my talk earlier came from one of Eric's papers. I thought they did this in Tripoli. So they'd use that.
Yeah, sure. So in Tripoli, so I have to remember what Henri did, but basically yes, I don't remember. I don't think they mixed the two. They compared the two. I think they compared, for instance, the using importance sampling with some kind of deterministic calculation for the eigenflux or whatever you think is a good reaction coordinate. And they use first the classical Monte Carlo importance sampling, and then also use the same kind of importance function to use it as a score for the MS.
Sorry, I think this
maybe this is my own. That's not my paper. Okay, good.
I think this is. But maybe I don't understand. I think this is the plot. Is this the right one, Eric? Was that Eric who just?
But this paper, maybe I don't know. So
this one.
Yeah. So here, I mean, it's indeed that. So when you see exponential transform, it's another word for importance sampling. And when you see AMS, it's adaptive multi-level splitting. And then there are 3 curves each time. And this depends on the importance function you use. So INIPOND is a deterministic function which is computed. I mean, it computes an approximation of the eigenflux using deterministic techniques, and there are other techniques on this. And then what they call the figure of merit is basically a product of the computational time with some variance or something like that. So basically, it's a way to measure how much you gain using compared to the analog, which is like the gold standard, the basic Monte Carlo technique. But maybe, if Eric was around, he could say more.
Yeah,
but...
I'm around. I'm sorry.
So please.
When I saw the paper, I knew that I missed something. But but what I just heard the last 30 seconds of what you said, but I don't know if I can add any more than that. But were there any open questions?
Maybe the IDT, je me souviens plus ce que c'est que le IDT, si tu peux.
IDT. So in fact, they are two, let's say, so both IDT and Apollo 3 are deterministic solvers. But Apollo 3 is, let's say, IDT has a very nice way of taking the energy into account. And so when you want because as Alex said this morning, you have to do a hypothesis on you have biases in deterministic cause coming from the spatial mesh, the angular mesh, and the energy mesh. And IDT is a way of having a poor spatial and angular mesh, but a very nice way to converge first the energy mesh. And so then once you have a nice energy meshing, you can bring it to Apollo 3, which will also solve the transport equation, just like IDT, but with a very nice way of taking into account the angular and the spatial mesh. So in fact, it's two deterministic solvers.
So this is doing what we were discussing, right? This is, you have an adjoint flux or an importance map coming from a deterministic solver, and then you are using AMS. So you're trying to use it to speed up AMS, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, exponential transform here, I think, is important sampling.
Is just important sampling,
Yeah.
And figure of merit, we want to be high or low?
So the exponential transform, it's important sampling, and we have, there's a zero variance scheme that you can build on the Boltzmann transport equation. And so I don't have it here, but it's so the exponential transform is the zero variance scheme associated to the Boltzmann transport equation, where we modified at the same time the transport kernel, the way you sample the length of the particles, and where you also bias the collision kernel.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we refer to when we say exponential transform. And we have different way of calculating the importance map. And once we have it, we can use it either for exponential transform or for AMS.
Sorry, a naive question. Do you want your figure of merit to be high or low? Is it low?
A good figure of merit is high. I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. Please.
Okay, so this one up here,
yeah,
I think is exponential. So actually, the exponential transform here is doing a lot better than the AMS method. Is that right?
Yeah, because there are zero variance results for the exponential transform. But, and I'm speaking under the supervision of Matthias and Tony, there is no zero variance scheme for AMS.
It's correct.
And so you can see it because when next important map shall transform just somewhere bring excellent results, something crazy. But you have to have an excellent importance map, which can cost a lot in terms of calculation times. Sometimes it's not that far, even when compared to Monte Carlo codes. So, and on the contrary, adaptative multi-level splitting, I mean, for me, is something extremely important for two reasons. The first one is that, as Tony said in his talk, it's extremely, let's say, robust, in the sense that even with a poor importance map, you have good results. And that's very important because, you know, there are engineers like spending their life to try to prepare very nice importance maps. And that's, I mean, sometimes this also takes a lot of time. And the second reason why, for me, AMS is so nice is that you can preserve correlations. And that's something that you need to have if you want, for example, to use variance reduction technique for medical application. Because it's one example, I could tell you like 10 examples, but just consider medical like radiotherapy application, which is what is extremely important is that first you bring the radiation to the target, and second is that you need to really calculate the way the energy carried by the particles is deposited in the target. And to deposit an energy in a target, you need to preserve all the correlations, because the particles, very often, it's not just like photons, it's an electromagnetic cascade implying photons, positron, electron, and then back photons, and so on. Because, in fact, photon, they produce electron by Compton effect, photoelectric effect, per creation. And electrons, they when they slow down, they emit some Bremsstrahlung effect, producing photons. So, in fact, a high energy photon, typically one that you can meet in a radiotherapy, once he has, once he arrives to the organ that you want to cure, let's say, in which you want to deposit the energy, in fact, in the tumor. So you need to go to the tumor, and once the energy is released, you really need to preserve the correlation of this particle cascade. And so this only the AMS can do it. You don't have any scheme that preserves the correlation with important sampling. And so that's why it's so important. I'm sorry, I've been long.
No. Okay. I think we should break for what Pierre called feeding time, which would actually be second feeding time for me, because I had feeding time, mini feeding time during the previous break. I kind of feel we really need to meet in person. We need to do this again in person. There's a lot to say. Let's meet back at what did the program say? At 3 o'clock Brexit time, which is 4 o'clock Central European time. And otherwise, let's thank everybody who's contributed to the discussion this morning. I don't know if you want to clap or wave your hand or whatever the right thing to do is these days. But otherwise, we'll see you at what was it again? 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock Brexit time, 4 o'clock Europe time.